Welcome to Module 3. Throughout the course, you've been exploring different elements of blended learning and thinking about your students and teaching. In this module, you'll have the chance to apply what you've learned and develop a plan that captures your ideas for how you might use blended learning with your students. In this module, we'll walk through some questions to help you develop a plan for trying blended learning with your students. The first thing to consider is what class or group of students might you want to try blended learning with first. There are several things to consider, and you know your students best. Do you have a class or a group of students that are more likely to embrace trying something new? Do you have some students that have shown evidence of motivation and perseverance, which may help them be more successful in the blended learning format? Also, what are your students' goals? Are there certain goals that may lend themselves more to this blended learning format? Or maybe you have easy access to online materials that align with some of your students' goals. For example, an online curriculum for ESL students. In addition to looking at your students, you'll also want to look at some logistical items as well. For example, what access to technology do students have within your program and outside of the program? Do they have easy access to online resources at home, or would they need to go to a public place, like a library? Along with access to technology, you'll also want to consider scheduling. If you are thinking about using a lab in your program, when is it available? What classes' schedule might best fit with the availability of the technology? You'll also want to make sure you set some reasonable expectations for what fits with your current workload. While you may eventually want to do something with all of your classes, you may find that realistically, it's more manageable to try it with one class or one group of students in a class. Alternatively, if you have other teachers or support for implementing blended learning, you may want to try something larger. Take a few minutes and write in your study guide the class or group of students that you might want to try blended learning with first. Be sure to include your rationale for choosing this group. Now that you've identified the students, let's think about the materials you might use with your students. As you know from the last module, blended learning includes students using online resources. Are there certain resources that you use already, or are there new ones that you think might be helpful to use with your students? Take some time and think about what online resources might be a good match for your students' skill level and goals. Take notes in your study guide about the types of resources you'd like to use. If you have specific online resources, it would be good to include them. If you're not exactly sure what resources you'd like to use, you can pause the lesson and take some time to explore what resources may be available, or just write a general description of the types of resources. For example, you may say that you would like your students to work online using a resource that allows them to write essays and peer review each other's work. Now that you've identified the students you'd like to try blended learning with, and some potential resources, take some time to describe in your study guide what the blended learning model looks like. When would students be working on the online resources? What are your expectations for them in terms of their online work? Also, think about your role as the teacher in this model. How will students receive support for their online work? Will it be provided by you or by someone else? How will students receive feedback for their online work? Write down your ideas in your study guide for what the blended model might look like. Although your plan still might be in its preliminary stages, it would be good to consider what outcomes you'd like to see after trying blended learning. Since this is something new, it may be good to think about this in terms of what do I hope my students learn from this experience, and what do I hope to learn from this experience. Some programs may already have structures in place that would allow them to easily track changes in student hours, educational gains, and outcomes. Others may not. You may want to talk with your program administrator to determine if there are specific outcomes he or she would like to see from trying blended learning. Ultimately, since this will be something new for you and your students, it may be good to take an experimental approach to this and look at this as a learning experience. What types of things have you learned about blended learning that could help you fully implement the program? What things did your students learn about themselves and the format that will help them? This course is an introduction to blended learning. You will most likely still have outstanding questions about blended learning. Take a moment to write down these questions in your study guide. Also, you've developed an initial plan for implementing blended learning. Think about what additional support you might need to supplement the plan. What support would you need at the programmatic level? Is there additional professional development support?
Great suggestions, Ben. Thank you. For further information and/or support in developing a blended learning model for your program, please contact the SABE's PD Center for Distance Learning and Technology at the numbers you see on your screen. Please continue on to Module 4 for more information to the DL programs here in Massachusetts. Thank you.